Hello, my name is Marianne and I'm an alcoholic. I'd like to welcome you to Recovery in Action Life on Life's Terms. This is an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. We're glad you're all here, especially newcomers. In keeping with our singleness of purpose and our third tradition, which states that the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking, we ask that all who participate confine their discussion to their problems with alcohol. This is an open Big Book step study meeting where we discuss the 12 steps of recovery as they're written in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, with the focus on their application in everyday life and recovery. This is the 10th session of the 7th cycle of the workshop that was presented on October 5th, 2024, where we completed the 7th step. Next week, we'll begin the 8th step. If you would like to contribute to the 7th tradition, you may do so using the QR codes displayed. Contributions are applied towards the group's expenses and support our service offices. Recordings of the workshop are available, and if you would like to be placed on the distribution list, please send an email to recoveryinaction462@gmail.com to receive the links. Please note that the group Conscience has decided to reclassify the listings of these videos as public on YouTube, so please feel free to share them if you would like. The workshop typically begins with a brief meditation in which an inspirational music video is played. Because of copyright restrictions, it cannot be on the video. However, a link is provided, and I suggest you take a minute, view the video, and take a brief meditation for yourself before you begin the workshop. As the recording begins, the workshop is already in session. Feel free to contact me if you have any additional questions or require my assistance further. I hope you enjoy the workshop. Another custom of this group is to start the workshop by saying the full version of the Serenity Prayer. We're all familiar with the first part, but many of us are unaware that there is a second part to it, and I believe it's this second part of the prayer that reflects what recovery is all about. So if you would all please join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace, taking as he did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. Amen. Our start book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is the set of instructions on how to get rid of the things that are blocking us off from our higher power, how to get connected to God, and how to stay surrendered from whatever is making our life unmanageable. However, merely reading the book without doing what it says is pretty much useless. You cannot learn how to swim without jumping in the water. So that's what we have to do. We have to continue to practice and practice and practice and practice. So when we go into the big book, we start at the cover page, which states that this is the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. That means that the problem is removed. I don't have to make a choice whether I drink or not, because I don't even think about it. I turn to God whenever I'm upset and not alcohol. It's no longer an option to solve my problems. Selfishness and self-centeredness are gone. I'm no longer angry, fearful, or harmful. My old destructive ways of thinking and acting have been replaced by new and peaceful ones. And then we move on to page 84, where it talks about the 10th step promise, which states that we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol, for by this time sanity will have returned. And just to skip over that, it goes on to say, that's how we react so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. And we move back to page 27, which states that ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. Then we skip all the way to the back to the appendix entitled The Spiritual Experience, says that recovered means that it is a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself among us in many different forms. And then we go to the forward to the first edition, which states that we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we recovered is the main purpose of this book. And it later goes on to say that the only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. However, the desire to stop drinking is not the only requirement to becoming recovered. There's other things involved, such as being willing and actually doing everything that the big book says to do. So we started with step 1, which starts in the doctor's opinion, which is on page 46. And step 1 is we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. This is the admission of powerlessness. This is self-awareness. Suddenly, we realize we can't drink. However, as a real alcoholic, the only thing that self-knowledge does is it makes me aware that I cannot take just one drink without being physically driven to take one drink after the other. This then allows me the opportunity, if I'm spiritually fit, to pass on the first drink. And I can only do this on a continuous basis if I'm connected to my higher power, which now brings us to step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And the thing about step 2 is I'm the one who decides what that power is. And once I'm able to do that, then I'm only looking at asking myself the question, do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe that there is a power greater than me that can solve my problem? If I answer yes to that question, then I'm ready for step 3, which is made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. The key here in step 3 is the first 3 words, made a decision. All I do in step 3 is make a decision. And I do that by what we call the 3rd step prayer, where we're offering ourselves to God and asking God to help us. And once we do that, we are ready to have the rubber meet the road, which is now step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. The moral inventory consists of 4 different inventories: our resentments, our fears, and the harms that we've done to the people in our lives. Harms excluding our sexual behavior, and harms that include our sexual conduct. And what it comes down to is looking at that. In most cases, we found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relations were hurt or threatened. So we listed opposite each name for our injuries. Was it our self-esteem, our security, our ambitions, our personal or sex relations that had been interfered with, which boils down to the parts of self: our self-esteem, our pocketbook, our emotional security, our ambitions, our personal relationships, and our sex relationships were either harmed or satisfied depending on the inventory. And what that comes down to is we start looking at where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened. Although a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved and look where we were to blame. The inventory was ours, not the other man's. So when we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly, and we're willing to set these matters straight. And these boil down to 5 main character defects. I'm selfish, I'm dishonest, I'm self-seeking, I'm frightened, and I'm inconsiderate. So these are the 5 main ones. And then these break down into various other character defects, like I'm an approval seeker, I'm a complainer, I'm a controller, I'm egotistical, I'm greedy, I'm immature, I'm judgmental, I'm lazy, I'm a procrastinator, I'm rude, on and on and on. And we do this because it's important that once we get into looking at this, in the book, it states that mean, egotistical, indignant, self-seeking, self-centered, and self-delusional, for example. Step 6 and 7's instructions includes that we're ready to let God remove from us all of the things that we have admitted are objectionable, and every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. So while every character defect falls within the 5 major ones, or a combination of it, it's better to be more specific. So for example, people pleasing is really being dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened all at the same time. But people pleasing gives a more accurate description of what I'm actually doing. And we do this because we repeat what we don't repair. The same situations will keep coming up over and over and over again because our character defects come into play. So it's not the person that we listed in column 1 of our resentment inventory, for example, but it's our character defects that come up. So we look at those character defects and we list them. Keep in mind that we are not bad people trying to get good, but sick people who are trying to get well. We may have done some pretty awful things, but those things do not define who we really are, and we've done nothing that we need to be punished for. When we get to steps 8 and 9, we start to take actions to correct these harms. Just remember that when you're working the steps, you end up with the same personality no matter who you're with. So once your character defects are removed, you no longer have the negative consequences brought into existence by the behaviors you had when you were at step 1, nor do you have inappropriate reactions to what's going on around you. And as a result of this, all your relationships change. Which is what is getting us ready to do our 5th step. But note, when the rest of the steps are done, any remaining resentment may go away in a very short period of time. Also, it's important to note here that God will only do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. So when we look at our fears and our harms inventories, we also look at the things that we are capable of doing. So we start setting some action plans on how to make those changes. Then we get to step 5, which is admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. And it's important to remember here that step 5 is done so you can see what's blocking you off from your higher power and causing your problems. The purpose of step 5 is to have these things revealed to you. And that brings us to the completion of the steps that are all about us. Now it's ready. Now we're ready to move to steps 6 and 7, where we start to make a shift. And this is where we start talking to God and looking to him for his help. And we start making the changes that we need to make. Start making those changes as we're living life. So step 6 is we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. The point is we've got to be entirely ready. So if we can answer to our satisfaction, yes, then we look at step 6. We're talking about being willingness is indispensable. Are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things which we have admitted are objectionable? These are all of our character defects. We've brought them to God. Can he now take them all, every one? If we still cling to something we will not let go of, we ask God to help us be willing. And then we got into the workbook on pages 149 and 150, where we had the defect asset table. And this is where we go into our inventory and we list all of our character defects. And I use the example of being a procrastinator. So we listed them all in the defect asset table because we're getting ready to be someone we've never been before. As someone without these character defects, you're going to be a lot better without them. So now you've got all of your character defects listed, and you're reading over the list of the character defects that you wrote down. And the question is, do you want them removed? And that can be a tough one because a lot of them we want to hold on to. But hopefully your answer is yes, and you're ready to move on to step 7. If you're not ready, then you ask God in your prayers to help you to be willing. But we're going to say, yes, we are ready, which brings us to step 7. Humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. And we started this last week. And this is the 7th step prayer, where we're now going to God and saying, okay, now I'm willing. You got all of me, the good and the bad. Please remove these defects of character. Grant me the strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. This now brings us back to that defect asset table, and we're going into the assets. So if we look at the list, we're looking at, okay, I have a character defect of being a procrastinator. So I find procrastinator over here, and it states that I'm willing to do what needs to be done immediately. And I list it here. And I do this with all of my character defects. So this was your homework. You have a list of your character defects. You have a list of your character assets. Remember, we don't need to have all of our character defects lifted from us at once, nor will they be. But we need to be continuously nudged in the right direction. So that nudge from God is in our morning prayers. So this is where I would say, using that procrastinator example, please God, stop me from being a procrastinator and teach me to be someone who does what needs to be done immediately. And we do each one immediately, such as, please God, stop me from being lazy and teach me to be someone who does what is needed immediately. Please God, stop me from being jealous and teach me to be happy for other people. Please God, stop me from being mean-spirited and teach me to be kind. And throughout the day, when these character defects crop up, which if you're anything like me, they will. If you have to drive on Route 287 or on the Parkway, these character defects are going to come up. So throughout the day, whenever a character defect crops up, immediately take a stop, take a breath, ask God to stop you from being whatever that character defect is and teach you to be the opposite, actually naming the character defect and its opposite. And then this is very important. You act as if you're someone who has that character asset. Remember, God will not immediately remove your defects. Nature abhors a vacuum. If the character defect is removed and you don't have the right thing to replace it with, something that might not enhance your life has a chance to come in and be the replacement. This is where sometimes we can get into other addictions and tell ourselves, oh, well, I'm not drinking, so I can go to Atlantic City and gamble, or I'm not drinking, I can buy myself these new things and put it on my credit card and run up my debt because I deserve it. So got something that might not enhance your life could come in. And the worst part of it is if it's another addiction, then we have to deal with that on top of everything else. And we run the risk of our life becoming unmanageable. So remember, God will give you many opportunities to practice the character asset. And when he thinks you've learned enough and practiced the opposite enough, he will remove the character defect. See, the use of step 7 in step 10 is where the remaining character defects get removed. But what we have to remember is that we live our lives shaped by our habits. And a habit is a past action repeated often enough that it becomes automatic. So I became an alcoholic, and that became a habitual thing to the point where it made my life unmanageable. And I have other habits as well that are based on my character defects, because my character defects have become automatic in me. And that has to do with the fight or flight response, which is the primitive response, which is based in the reptilian part of our brain. It is what helped us to survive our hunter-gatherer primitive days to get to where to survive and create our civilization as it is today. But as alcoholics, our fight or flight response gets triggered more easily, and our character defects have been repeated so often that there are automatic, unconscious response to having a part of ourselves hurt, threatened, or interfered with. So when it comes down to my character defects come into play to protect me, and it may have been appropriate at some time in my life, but they've outlived their usefulness, and instead they cause problems for us. So we're taught when we first come into the program that we have to accept responsibility for ourselves, our sobriety, and our circumstances. So what we are is proactive and not reactive. But first we have to understand what reactive means. And this is where I added a section from Dr. Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Because when he talks about habit 1, be proactive, the first thing he says is the best way to understand what it means to be proactive is to look at the opposite, which is be reactive. And when we're reactive, we get a stimulus and it goes right to a response as if the two are together. It's like when you go to the doctor and they hit you on the knee with that little hammer, you get that automatic knee-jerk reaction. Now, when we're reactive, when we're proactive, we separate that stimulus response and we pause. We pause in looking at the things where we have some power and control. And that power and control is looking at what can I do something about, what do I have to accept? And that brings us to what Dr. Covey calls the circle of concern. This large circle represents everything in the universe we might have a concern about. This smaller circle in the center represents everything that we can do something about. Now, if I spend my time and my energy out here in this outer circle, I am going to be frustrated, angry, triggered. I am acting out of my character defects, which ultimately could lead me back to picking up a drink and activating my alcoholism again, which I don't want to do. In order for me to be proactive, I have to concentrate my time and my energy on this smaller circle in the middle, which means the circle of influence. So whenever something happens, I ask myself the question, is there anything I can do about this situation right now, this minute? If the answer is no, I have to accept it as being within the circle of concern that I can't do anything about. I have to look for something that I can do something about. So I can put down the drink. I can go to a meeting. I can call my sponsor. I can do my step work. That's all within my circle of influence. Now, the interesting thing of what Dr. Covey talks about in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is that the more I focus on the things that are in my circle of influence, causes that circle to grow, which cuts down on the circle of concern. To bring it back to our program, this is a shortcut for understanding the serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. That's the stuff out here in the circle of concern. The courage to change the things I can, that's the stuff in here, but that's where it takes courage. Because sometimes I have to confront that I'm going to have to make some major changes, and I'm going to feel a little bit uncomfortable because anytime anything is new, there's uncomfortability. And then the wisdom to know the difference between the two. And when I am focusing on those things within my circle of influence, that's when I'm sober. When I'm reacting to the things outside of my circle of influence, the things that I cannot change, that's when I'm heading towards a drink or being in what I would call a dry drunk syndrome, because I'm not thinking sober. Thinking sober is I'm looking at the reality. If I'm focusing on things that are outside of my control, I am not in touch with reality. So that brings me back to this, what happened here? That brings me back to this stimulus response, where the freedom to choose is based on, superimposed on what Dr. Covey now calls the four endowments of the human personality, which are self-awareness, imagination, conscience, and independent will. And all of that is self-awareness. I know I'm an alcoholic. My imagination is I'm stuck with a situation, something's come up, and I'm asking myself, okay, what are some of the things I can do about this? So I'm generating some alternatives. Maybe I can call my sponsor. Maybe I can go to a meeting. Maybe I can do some prayer and meditation. What are some of the things that I can do? Then my conscience, and I could even say, well, I could drink because I'm not, but then my conscience is going to kick in and say, nope, that wouldn't be the right thing for me to do. What's the best thing for me to do right now? Maybe the best thing for me to do right now is call my sponsor. Maybe the best thing for me to do right now is go to a meeting. And then my independent will gives me choices where I have a choice as to what it is that I'm going to do right now, this minute. And that is what gives me my response. That is where I'm living life on life's terms. I have the freedom to choose. I know I'm an alcoholic. I'm going to generate options, and then my conscience is going to help me to choose the best reaction, the best response. And my independent will is, okay, I can do this or I can do this. What's the best thing for me to do? See, and that again brings us back to the serenity prayer. It's sourced in the serenity prayer. When we get sober, we're focusing on the things that, acceptance. Acceptance is the answer to all my problems today, which is the story in the big book. Therefore, I'm focusing on the things that I can do something about. And now that I'm sober, I have the wisdom to know what I can and I cannot do. Step 7 and the use of step 7 in step 10 teaches us not to react inappropriately to everyday situations that we might misinterpret as threatening. See, as an alcoholic, I misinterpret things. I make everything about me. I'm at a meeting. The chairperson is leading the meeting. It's a discussion meeting. Everybody has their hand up. Everybody wants to share. I have my hand up. I don't get called on. Someone puts their hand up after me and they get called on. Now, my brain starts making things up. That's where the stimulus response starts going nuts. Oh, that person doesn't like me. They don't want to hear what I have to say. Oh, I don't like them now. I'm getting a resentment. Blah, 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 blah. My feelings are hurt. Oh, I'm going to talk about that person now. How dare they not do that? As opposed to the reality might be, if you've ever been leading a discussion meeting, sometimes it can get pretty active, and it can get, a lot of people can have their hands up at the same time. So maybe the leader just didn't see your hand, or anything could be going on. But see, I make it up. And of course, I don't go to the person and ask them. I walk around and I talk about them and I make up stories about them. And they don't really know what they're doing. They don't know what they're talking about, because I misinterpret everyday situations that I think are threatening. And see, step 7 starts to teach us the things that are unmanageable in our lives. And these are the things that upset us and the things that we're afraid of. All of them are caused by our distortion of what's actually going on around us, our giving more credit and attention to those things than they deserve, and then having our character defects come into play. And they're trying to protect us, because it's going back to the point where at one point in our life, they may have worked, maybe when we were children. I know for myself, the character defect of being a people pleaser was very powerful in me. And for the longest time, even in sobriety, I didn't even realize it was operating. And until I realized that many of the major decisions I made in my life were as a result of that character defect. But you see, that character defect worked for me when I was a child growing up in an alcoholic household. I had to be the good little girl. I had to be the daddy's little girl, daddy's cute little girl. I always had to look pretty and be good and make sure that I was everything to everybody. I took care of everybody because I was daddy's little girl. But those characteristics didn't work for me as an adult. As an adult, I had to confront those things. First of all, I had to realize I was doing it, because a lot of those character defects, a lot of those character traits, rather, were a lot of the things that made me successful in my career. I mean, I was a team player. Everybody knew that they could count on me to get things done. But the underlying motivation wasn't that I was doing this out of a true desire to serve. And I was doing it out of a true desire to manipulate. In other words, I was keeping score. When I did something for you, I was keeping points. I was taking points. I was deciding, okay, I'm doing this for you. So the next time I want something from you, you better do it. And then when you didn't do it, I got resentful. But of course, I couldn't tell you that, because I had to be a people pleaser. And if I told you that I was upset with you, well, you might not like me, or you might. So therefore, that character defect was still operating even on the outside when everything looked good. But it was what was going on inside of me where the character defect was being resentful, but yet I would be sweet as anything to your face. And then the next time you needed something, I would do it again. And in my mind, I'm keeping score. Yeah, I'm doing another thing for this one. Yeah, they're going to owe me. And it just compounded itself, because I was dishonest. I was dishonest with other people, and I was dishonest with myself. And that is the distortion of everything that was going on around me, because I gave more credit and attention to things than they deserved. I was busy trying to manipulate you by being a people pleaser. That's just one character defect that I'm using an example of. So with steps, in step 7, this is where we start to look at this stuff. Thank you so much for your participation. I hope you enjoyed the workshop. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. And now, please join me in our closing prayer, which is St. Faustina's prayer for mercy. Eternal God, in whom mercy is endless and the treasury of compassion inexhaustible, Look kindly upon us and increase your mercy in us, that in difficult moments we might not despair nor become despondent, but with great confidence submit ourselves to your holy will, which is love and mercy itself. Amen.